This is Nadia, pronouns are she, her, from New York, and wants to talk about the risks of fundamentalist in government and the consequences for LGBT. Nadia, you are on the show. What would you like to talk about?
Hello. Yeah, I think people are sort of radically understating the consequences of, I guess, the fundies getting into the government and actually making laws against people. I mean, they actually put people in prison for gay sex, and when the sodomy laws get overturned, ruling that said sodomy laws were unconstitutional gets overturned, and they'll also when they make being trans illegal, that will be very interesting. How exactly does someone stop being trans? They would probably not be satisfied with a trans woman cutting her hair short and wearing trousers. They're almost certainly going to force surgeries to reverse transitions, at least partially, on people. And they'll also put the people in prison, of course.
I'm gonna push back a little bit. I don't think they can.
Okay.
Like when they're going to, if we get to a place where they decide to ban trans people in general, I don't think they can force surgeries. They can't force a surgery or a reversal of surgery on anybody. What would happen? It's very dangerous, because what they would do and are starting to do is, of course, ban healthcare for trans people. It's going to force people in the closet, and it's going to be especially dangerous for people who have already had a surgery, because they're not going to be able to force you to reverse a surgery. But if they take away hormones from somebody who has had surgery that can no longer produce their own sex hormones, then they're going to have some pretty severe consequences, because they won't be able to replace the hormones they used to have anymore. So that's the big thing that I see being the problem. But yeah, it's absolutely scary that we're at a place where people are injecting their viewpoints on this into policy.
Well, a million people is not that many to mass in prison, and they can track trans people down pretty quickly with searches for changes in gender markers and so on.
Yeah, they can. Yeah, the prison thing is likelier as well.
The forced surgery, actually, I believe, is regarded as constitutional. There was Skinner v. Oklahoma, I think, that said for the sake of punitive things, that a surgery would not be correct. But in the line of reasoning that is pretty easily available, they would be doing it to halt the commission of the crime, as opposed to being punitive per se. So
the conflict, though, is even if, and I'm not going to weigh in necessarily on whether or not a surgery is constitutional, because I'm not an attorney. I'm not an expert in that, but we do have a conflict there with the medical ethics standards, and that's where the issue is. So even if it's constitutional theoretically to perform a forced surgery, it's still not medically ethical, and doctors would not be able to do that to somebody. Especially adults.
The trick is, of course, there are doctors like Paul McHugh and so on who are going to take a different.
They could take a different stance. They still, no matter what your stance on it is, you cannot force a surgery on somebody. It doesn't matter what your viewpoint is. And that's the same with any surgeries. Like you can't force like even take an example of circumcision, which is, I don't agree with circumcision, but some people do. But it's not the doctor weighing in on their opinion of circumcision. It's the parents who are the ones that are able to medically consent for their child. And that's where the issue comes down to. Like, even if a doctor wants to circumcise or not circumcise a baby, it's not up to the doctor at that point. It still relates to medical autonomy of the parents of the child who are able to give consent. So like it's very sticky. And like, so even if you had a doctor that wanted to do something, you still cannot force a medical procedure at all.
Historically, I mean, lobotomies and I believe also castration was done to mental patients against their wills. And so, yeah,
and that's no longer viewed as medically ethical, right? So again, this is a conflict of medical ethics. So we've established very clear guidelines for medical ethics nowadays, and what were those ethics in the past may have been different, and they were often like less defined. But in modern day medicine, there are certain things that, like, unless we had a massive change in how medical ethics is viewed, which I don't really see that happening, because of the fact, especially that the medical boards and the medical organizations are all in favor of the current guidelines that we have. I don't see that being as likely to actually happen. It would be more fringe cases, which is a problem. Like I agree, those fringe cases that would happen would be a problem. But that's why I am going to push back on their ability to force surgery.
They can keep somebody in prison until they submit to getting the surgeries as well. So basically saying they're still actively committing the crime by having their body in that state.
I have a lot of questions on this. I think you need to maybe call in when somebody who's more legally knowledgeable is on, because there's a lot of things here, but a lot of it too is going to depend on what specifically is defined as the criminal act, because that's a huge bag of worms that we'd have to deal with. And even a lot of the legislation as it is now is not very, it doesn't always agree on those terms too. So I think maybe you need to have this discussion with somebody that is more legally minded, because I don't want to necessarily go in that direction, because I just don't know. But I think I still stand with my perspective from the medical ethics standpoint and what would be more likely to happen there. And you can disagree with me, and I don't know what's going to happen, but that's at least where I'm a little bit reassured.
Yeah, well, that's not very much reassurance, because mass imprisonment is still pretty bad.
No, that's a big issue, but I think there is a problem when we like start adding more layers that aren't necessarily going to be a contributing factor. I think if we're going to maintain skepticism, we need to not go down certain trails that we don't really have reason to believe either. So I think like the whole situation isn't reassuring necessarily, but there's certain aspects that we don't need to add on to the issue without really investigating that. So that's really all I'm saying. So
they've been caught on tape talking. So I mean, we can get ideas of what their intentions are, and they have, I guess, things like 100% desistance as one of their goals for trans people, which means something medically.
Right, but again, there's so many layers here about definitions, and are these definitions going to be consistent and all that? I think maybe we need to pick up this conversation a different time with somebody that is more legally minded, because I mean, as much as I want to have this conversation, I just don't know how far we're going to get without unpacking a lot of this. And I think since we're at the end of the show, I don't think we have the time to really go into this. So I think,
well,
is there anything
pushing out of
kind
public
of,
life,
yeah, I'll kind of wrap this up. I'll let you,
like, quote unquote, pushing out of public life is a dramatic understatement of the actual threat. And I don't think it's productive to be understated like that regarding it.
and that's not, I'm not understating the threat. Like, I'm not saying that that we don't need to worry, but what I'm saying is there are some layers here that I think are a bit exaggerated. Right. So I'm trying to be careful with where our thought process goes on this. And there's certain parts of this that do need to be talked about a lot more, and certain things that are more immediately important, and others that we can put on the back burner for now while we handle these more pressing issues. Right. So I think we're going to end the show for today, but thank you for calling in.
Yes. Thank you.